Canadian lumber is taking another hit from U.S. President Donald Trump's trade war. New tariffs announced last month are now in effect. They include a global tariff on 10% of all softwood lumber and timber entering the U.S.
U.S. President Donald Trump has announced new tariffs on Canadian wood and furniture products. An additional 10% tariff is going to apply to imported timber and lumber on top of the existing 35% anti-dumping duties.
Not the 10% on top of the 35%, which brings us to 45.14%, which is devastation on top of already a bad situation.
It was supposed to be a victory for American workers, a bold move to protect U.S. industry and punish unfair trade. But in a stunning twist, it's now hitting Americans harder than anyone else. Trump's new tariffs on Canadian lumber, meant to strengthen the U.S. economy, are instead driving home prices through the roof, adding nearly $11,000 to the cost of every new house. And while Americans struggle to afford their dreams, Canada is quietly turning the tables using Washington's aggression to build new markets, new alliances, and new leverage in a global economy that no longer plays by the same rules. When the Trump administration reintroduced heavy tariffs on Canadian softwood lumber, the message was clear: America first. The goal was to reduce dependency on foreign materials, revive domestic lumber mills, and punish Canada for what U.S. officials called unfair subsidies. On paper, it sounded patriotic, a way to bring back jobs and give the U.S. construction industry an edge. But in practice, it's turning into one of the most ironic economic backfires of the year. Because here's the truth: the United States simply doesn't produce enough lumber to meet its own demand. For decades, America has relied on Canadian imports, especially softwood used in framing homes to keep housing affordable. Roughly 1/3 of all lumber used in American construction comes from Canada. And when tariffs drive up those prices, builders have no choice but to pass the extra costs on to buyers. Now, with Trump's latest tariffs hovering around 25%, the impact is immediate and brutal. According to the National Association of Home Builders, those tariffs alone are adding about $11,000 to the price of a typical new single-family home in the United States. That means fewer Americans can afford to buy. Fewer homes are being built. And the already fragile dream of homeownership, especially for young families, is slipping further away. For years, America's housing market has been stretched to the breaking point. Supply shortages, inflation, and rising mortgage rates have made it one of the toughest times in modern history to buy a home. The average 30-year mortgage rate is still above 7%. Construction costs are soaring. And now, the very material needed to build those homes is caught in a political crossfire between Washington and Ottawa. The irony is painful. While the policy was designed to protect American industry, it's actually hurting the people it was meant to help U.S. lumber mills, already struggling with labor shortages and outdated equipment, can't suddenly ramp up production to replace Canadian imports. So what happens instead? Builders delay projects, contractors cut back, and home buyers, ordinary Americans, pay the price. Small construction companies across states like Texas, Florida, and Georgia are sounding the alarm. They say the new tariffs are forcing them to either raise prices or halt new builds altogether. Many smaller builders operate on thin margins, and when the cost of framing lumber jumps by 20 or 30%, the math just doesn't work anymore. In effect, this tariff isn't saving American jobs, it's threatening them. Every slowdown in housing construction ripples through the economy. It hits carpenters, electricians, roofers, and real estate agents. It weakens local tax bases and stifles growth in communities that depend on new development. Meanwhile, north of the border, Canada is responding not with outrage, but with strategy. Ottawa has seen this movie before. The softwood lumber dispute between the U.S. and Canada has been running for decades through Republican and Democratic administrations alike. And every time Washington imposes tariffs, Canada finds new ways to adapt. This time, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's government moved fast. They rolled out new support programs for Canadian lumber exporters, offering temporary subsidies to offset losses. But the bigger play was diplomatic and global. Canada began expanding its exports to Europe and Asia, leveraging trade deals like CETA with the European Union and the CPTPP with Pacific nations. Within months, Canadian lumber that once went almost entirely to the US was finding new buyers in Germany, Japan, and South Korea. In other words, Trump's tariffs didn't isolate Canada, they pushed it to diversify. And that's a long-term win for Ottawa. The more Canada spreads its exports across different markets, the less dependent it becomes on the United States. That shift in leverage may seem small today, but geopolitically, it's massive. Because lumber isn't just wood, it's power. It's a fundamental building block of modern economies. And when the US uses tariffs as a weapon, it sends a signal to the world. America's supply chains are no longer reliable. That kind of message weakens trust among allies and encourages countries to hedge against US influence. It's not just Canada learning this lesson. Across the globe, nations that once relied on the United States are now preparing for an era of uncertainty, building their own trade networks, stockpiling resources, and crafting deals that bypass Washington entirely. Back in the US, the consequences are already visible. The housing affordability crisis, once seen as a regional issue in big cities, is now spreading into suburban and rural America. In states like Idaho, Tennessee, and North Carolina, builders are reporting record costs for framing materials. Some projects have been abandoned mid-construction because budgets no longer add up. Others are being scaled back into smaller, cheaper homes, reducing quality, size, and long-term value. For ordinary Americans, that means fewer options and higher prices. For the economy, it means slower growth and weaker consumer confidence. And for Trump's 2025 economic agenda, built around promises of self-reliance and industrial revival, it's a growing political risk. Even some of his allies in the construction and real estate sectors are quietly frustrated. They argue that tariffs on Canadian lumber are a self-inflicted wound at a time when the country can least afford it. Home prices are one of the most visible economic indicators in America, and when they rise sharply, voters notice. But beyond the politics, there's a deeper story unfolding, one about how economic nationalism, when taken too far, can undermine the very foundations of national strength. Protecting domestic industries sounds noble, but when it's done without considering real-world supply chains, it can lead to scarcity, inefficiency, and unintended pain for the public. Canada understands this dynamic well. Instead of retaliating with anger, Ottawa's approach has been measured, and tactical. Canadian officials are now investing heavily in green building materials, exploring alternatives like cross-laminated timber and engineered wood products that are gaining popularity worldwide. By the time Washington reconsiders its policies, Canada's lumber sector may have evolved into something more advanced and less dependent on US demand altogether. It's a quiet kind of revenge, not through confrontation, but through innovation. Meanwhile, the US construction industry continues to bear the brunt. The National Association of Home Builders estimates that the new tariffs will cut tens of thousands of planned housing starts in 2025. That means fewer jobs, fewer affordable homes, and less momentum in an economy already battling inflation fatigue. Even Federal Reserve analysts are starting to take note. Housing contributes roughly 15 to 18% of the US GDP when you include construction, furnishing, and related industries. If tariffs slow that sector down, the ripple effects could reach far beyond the housing market, dragging on employment, consumer spending, and even regional tax revenues. And yet politically, tariffs remain popular. They project toughness. They sell the idea of sovereignty. But in an interconnected global economy, that symbolism comes at a price, one paid not by the policymakers, but by the people. In this case, the price is painfully clear. An extra $11,000 on the cost of a home doesn't sound like much in Washington, but for millions of working families, it's the difference between buying and renting, between security and uncertainty. It's another reminder that in modern geopolitics, the line between national pride and economic pain can be dangerously thin. Canada's calm, calculated response to this crisis is a masterclass in patience and positioning. Rather than escalating tensions, it's using the moment to showcase reliability to Europe, to Asia, and to investors looking for stability in a volatile world. In contrast, the United States is sending mixed signals, punishing allies while struggling to control domestic inflation. That contrast matters. It shapes perceptions, trade flows, and even alliances. Because when economic power begins to shift, it rarely happens with a bang. It happens through small, steady realignments like this one, a tariff here, a subsidy there, a new export deal signed quietly in the background. And so, the story of Trump's lumber tariffs isn't just about wood or housing. It's about a deeper turning point, the moment when America's attempt to assert dominance exposed its dependence instead. It's about how even the world's largest economy can stumble when politics overtakes pragmatism. In the end, the lesson is simple but sobering. You can't build walls around a global supply chain. When you try, the costs don't vanish, they just land on your own doorstep. And that's where things stand. A tariff meant to protect America ends up costing its own people more, while Canada quietly turns challenge into advantage. The global balance is shifting, not with wars or speeches, but with economic moves like these.